Hi everyone, welcome to Module 2, Operational Management in Sport. In this video we focus on mixed sector provision in sport. Acknowledge the lands on where our campuses are located and extend our respects to elders past, present and emerging. So in this video we're focusing in on the three sectors of sport. They are public, private and not-for-profit. So there are a range of organisations that are involved in sport management, and Hoy et al. Highlight that these organisations conduct business in sport. They might also form partnerships and they might also influence each other's operations. A key way to understand these operations and influences between organisations is to think about the sector that they belong to. So depending on where they're located, it gives us insight into what their objectives might be, their organisational structure and some of their business strategies. Another unique and defining element of sport management, and as opposed to business management where we really rely on the private sector to deliver services and goods to customers, the landscape of sport includes not only private organisations, but it has a heavy presence of government involvement and also not-for-profit involvement. We're going to take a brief look at each of these sectors and the key points that distinguish each of those sectors, how the influences of these sectors influence how organisations operate, and the interactions that they have between sectors in that delivery of sport as well. So in the private sector, most people automatically think of professional sport here. We think of professional leagues and member teams, and that's certainly, good examples of the private sector. Sporting apparel equipment manufacturers, big media companies, stadium managers, people that are contracted to manage the facility, and also event managers. But it also includes commercially run organisations that are set up as companies. Okay, we might have a privately owned facility. For instance, there's indoor sports centres or cricket centres around the neighbourhood that are often set up and run by it might be a family or independent entrepreneur type people. We might have local active play or football soccer franchises, and increasingly we're seeing national and state sport governing bodies transition from associations, which in the not-for-profit space that we'll look at in a minute, but they're transitioning from those not-for-profit structures into companies. So they are set up to run as private sector companies. In the public sector, this concerns our national government, so our Australian government, federal government, our state governments, also our regional and local governments, the ones that run those kind of community-based facilities in your community. We also have, apart from a regular department for sport and recreation or something along those lines, we also see specialist agencies that develop sport policy. They provide funding, they might provide specialist roles such as elite athlete development or even doping control, and they can exist at that state and national level typically. In terms of the not-for-profit sector, the non-profit or voluntary sector, it's also sometimes referred to as the third sector, the space that is not government and is not private. And importantly here, we talk about not-for-profit, but that doesn't mean that these organisations don't make money, okay? It's just that they can't distribute those funds to shareholders or company owners. The money that's made or the profits that are made from their operations need to be reinvested back into their business. In this case, it would be, those membership fees and canteen takings and whatnot at the local sports club are reinvested back into the delivery of sport opportunities. Our not-for-profit sector is made up from community-based clubs, governing associations, and some international sport organisations are still run as not-for-profit entities. These organisations provide competition and participation opportunities. They are essentially like that coalface, I guess, delivering directly to the general public, which sets them apart a little bit from other players in the other sectors. These not-for-profit organisations also have a role in regulating and managing sports codes, and some of them do organise major events. So these sectors, they don't operate in isolation. It's not that all the public guys hang out together, all the privates hang out together. In many cases, there's overlaps between the functions and operations across these organisations. We've got some examples there in terms of the interactions between state and not-for-profit organisations, state and private commercial organisations, and then also between not-for-profit and private commercial organisations. So let's chat through some of the examples that Hoy include in their textbook, Hoy et al. Include in their textbook. They talk about the state being involved in providing funding to non-profit sport organisations for the development of sport and elite athlete programs. Okay, so that's the state giving something in terms of the not-for-profit sport organisations, and then in return, the not-for-profit sport organisations provide the general community with sporting opportunities. They also develop athletes, coaches and officials and administrators to sustain sport participation. So there is that kind of mutual benefit. The state provides funding to the not-for-profit sport, and the sport's able to deliver on the state or the government's directives, for whether that's community health and well-being or connectivity or what that might be. The state's also involved in commercial sport, okay, and that includes supporting the building of major stadiums and other sporting facilities where professional sport can be played. So they'll often invest in, the upgrades of facilities, those kind of things. We see that the private sector isn't going to invest that much money for sport, but the government sometimes will to enable the professional sport to be played. The state also provides regulatory and legal frameworks for professional sport to operate within, and regulations also govern things like equipment manufacturing and the staging of events. There's certain laws and regulations that we need to abide by. The not-for-profit sports sector, in terms of that interaction with private and commercial organisations, okay? Not-for-profit sports sector supports professional sport by providing talent for professional leagues, okay? So we feed players and athletes up. And then also we develop coaches, at the grassroots, officials, administrators, and they also often progress through to elite sport. The professional sports sector, in return, markets sport for spectators and participants, and in some cases, money that's made at that professional level is invested back into the grassroots. So if the professional sports sector makes revenue from TV broadcast rights, sometimes we can see that that's invested back into the grassroots. It doesn't always happen like that, depending on what we're looking at and the kind of circumstances surrounding the sport. But in an ideal world, we'd like to see that happening. You are encouraged following this video to select one of 3 book chapters that go in depth into one of the sectors that we've covered off in this video. Some critical questions here to guide your reading. As you're working through those chapters, think about these. So if you choose the state government public sector chapter, I want you to be thinking about, why do governments intervene? Or intervene means get involved in sport. We know that governments invest in sport. Okay, we provide funding to make sport happen. They also have a role in regulating sport, so they provide the legal framework that sport needs to operate within as well. If you have a look at the private commercial chapter, I want you to be thinking about, what are some of the tensions between private sport organisations and government, and how do they impact on sport? Do they impact positively in some ways or negatively in others? What are some of those issues that we're seeing as you read through that book chapter? If you look at the not-for-profit chapter, I want you to be thinking about, what are some of the contemporary challenges facing not-for-profit sport organisations? As I mentioned in the video, we're seeing some not-for-profit organisations upgrade their governance and their organisational structures. So no longer, I guess a less formal association type structure, and more moving towards those company structures. Why might that be? And then more broadly than that, in the not-for-profit space that's heavily reliant on volunteers, what are some of the challenges that we're seeing in that space? It's a very important part of the sport landscape, not for profit, but also one that, is facing a number of different challenges. And then finally, as you're reading through those chapters, I want you to think about, what are some of the examples of organisations across the sectors? How do they differ? Are you seeing differences in structure, objectives, the ways that they work across those different sectors? Think about some that you might know, some that you interact with in your own sporting experiences, and some that you see in your community. Okay, acknowledge the references that have informed this part of the lecture, and we'll wrap this one up there. Thanks, everyone.